History's got its share of legendary warriors, right? But few are as captivating or as brutal as the woman we're digging into today, Tomoe Gozen.
I mean, listen to this. Ancient texts describe her with a phrase that just stops you in your tracks. Worth 1,000 warriors. Just let that sink in for a second. What kind of person even earns a reputation like that?
And trust me, this wasn't some poetic nickname. Nope, the historical accounts are pretty visceral, because her reputation was built on a truly terrifying practice. She was known for taking the heads of her enemies, right there on the battlefield.
So a warrior worth 1,000 soldiers, a headhunter on the battlefield. Yeah, that's a pretty fearsome introduction. So let's peel back the layers and find the real story behind this incredible legend. It's an absolutely powerful image, isn't it? But it brings us to the central question we're tackling today. Who was the actual woman behind this brutal and kind of awe-inspiring legend? To really understand the warrior, we first have to understand her world. You just can't separate a figure like Tomoe Gozen from the time and place that created her.
And that time was 12th century Japan, smack dab in the middle of the Genpei War. We're talking about an incredibly violent and chaotic period of civil war that raged for 5 years and completely reshaped the entire country.
And you really get a feel for the world she lived in. This was the absolute height of samurai culture, a society dominated by men who lived and died by these super rigid codes of honor. So for a woman to be on the battlefield, let alone leading, was a pretty big deal.
But, she wasn't a complete one-off. There was a recognized class of female warriors from the nobility, and they were known as the onna-bugeisha. Now, they were trained to defend their homes. What made Tama so different is that she didn't just play defense, she took the fight to the open battlefield.
Okay, so now that we've got a feel for her world, let's zoom in on Tomoe herself. What were the skills that earned her that incredible title, worth 1,000 warriors?
Well, our main source for her story comes from the Tale of the Haika, which is this famous epic account of the Genpei War. In it, she's described as serving the warlord Minamoto no Yoshinaka. And she wasn't just any soldier. She was elite, an exceptional swordswoman and a deadly archer, apparently ready for any challenge thrown her way. This brings us back to that shocking detail from the beginning, the head-taking. To us, it sounds unbelievably brutal, but in the samurai culture of this period, it wasn't just about pure violence. Taking an enemy's head was the ultimate proof of victory, and a really powerful symbol of honor.
And this lays out the process perfectly. It was a ritualized code. First, you had to defeat a worthy opponent. Then, you'd take their head as a trophy. And finally, you would present that head to your lord as proof of your victory and your contribution to the cause.
A life lived with that much intensity on the battlefield often has a dramatic ending. But for Tomoe Gozen, the end of her story is as shrouded in legend as her life was.
We have these really vivid accounts of her during the war, but what happened after? That's where her story becomes a real mystery, one that historians are still debating.
So there are basically two competing theories. One version says she died heroically in battle, fighting right to the very end. But another, equally popular story says she actually survived the war, was devastated by the loss of her lord, and decided to put down her sword forever and become a nun, living out her days in peace.
So, whether she died in a final blaze of glory or found peace in a monastery, her story was far from over. In fact, you could say her legend was just beginning.
And this, right here, is the core of her enduring legend. In an era with incredibly strict gender roles, she didn't just challenge the rules, she shattered them, simply by being too skilled, too dominant on the battlefield to be ignored.
Ultimately, it all comes down to this number 1. In a history that's filled with thousands of legendary male samurai, she stands out as one singular, powerful figure whose name has echoed through the centuries.
And so her story leaves us with a final question. She exists in that fascinating space between historical fact and epic myth, which makes you wonder, how are our greatest legends really born? Is it from the facts on the page, or from the stories we choose to tell about them?